The air was heavy with swamp rot and concrete dust as I stood at the edge of what used to be my backyard and watched Karen from the HOA screaming at a city inspector. Her $800,000 McMansion was sinking, another inch into the muck. Flash flood warnings warbled from parked squad cars, frogs croaked from front yards, and somewhere out across the watery hellscapes, a rusted mailbox floated by like a funeral barge. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how it all came to this. I never imagined that the skinny little creek winding through my backyard would become a battleground. But that's exactly what happened. For years, that trickle of water had been my sanctuary, my reward after long days welding pipes and crawling under houses. I'd sit in a folding chair beside it, beer in one hand, fishing pole in the other. I never landed anything bigger than a curious bluegill, but that wasn't the idea. Dragonflies darted in and out of the reeds. The scent was like wet grass, and the only noise at night was the soft humming of the water. It was serene, untouched. Then the HOA came along. Technically, they'd been residing creekside of the neighborhood for decades, cozy in their twin beige houses with immaculately coordinated Halloween decorations. We were the old-timers over here on the creekside, remnants of the days when the neighborhood was fields and gravel roads. But the boundaries got redefined, neighborhoods got annexed, and before we knew it, the HOA had insinuated itself into our lives like an oil slick. My first encounter with their meddling was on a hot Saturday morning in the form of Karen Mitchell, clipboard in hand, pastel-colored exercise attire, stretched tightly over someone who most certainly was not exercising. Her smile was as warm as a tax audit. She informed me that she was the HOA's Community Standards Chair. I told her I was busy. She had concerns about my property, essentially the creek. According to her, it was an errant body of water, making a danger spot for kids and pets. I stared at her as if she'd accused my cat of securities fraud. The creek was natural, had been here long before any of us came with mortgages and zero-turn mowers. I explained this to her politely and pointed to the deed and county ordinances that kept it as a drainage easement. She huffed, scribbled something on her clipboard, and left in a cloud of overpriced perfume and irritation. 2 days later, there was a notice on my door, blue painter's tape naturally. Unapproved landscaping, dangerous water, inviting non-native wildlife. It appeared frogs were now considered foreign invaders. I ignored it. A week later, another notice. $100 per day fine if I did not submit a compliance plan. I sent them a copy of my land survey and the relevant county codes. They responded by mandating a mandatory inspection. The inspection team came like they were at a crime scene. 3 strangers with tape measures and cell phones, photographing every inch of my property. Karen stood on the creek bank, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. I stood beside her, arms crossed, daring them to cross the creek. They didn't, but they took a lot of notes. At the next HOA meeting, which I otherwise had no plans on attending, Karen spoke before a lethargic room of neighbors and declared my creek unsafe. Insurance risks, mosquitoes, erosion. The irony of a natural creek being defined as dangerous in a swamp-dominant neighborhood was apparently lost on her. When I relocated to protest, she handed me a packet of paperwork insisting that I fence the creek, fill it in, or have weekly inspections, at my own cost. I told her very nicely where I'd like she and those forms to go. Things came to a head. Anonymous complaints about my landscaping started surfacing. My mailbox was kicked off its post. Rocks were thrown into the creek, clogging it up. I even saw Karen in her SUV, engine running, taking pictures of my yard like some tacky private eye. But I held firm. I left the creek open, cut the reeds, let the water flow. It was my land, my water, and my right to sit beside it in peace. I should have known they would not stop. It happened early on a Wednesday morning. I was having coffee when I heard the rumble of heavy equipment. A cement truck was backing down the alleyway beside my house. A man in a vest was following behind it, clipboard in hand. "Hey!" I shouted. "What the devil do you think you're doing?" "Work orders," he said. "Drainage mitigation. HOA approved." Before I could complain, the chute dropped, and wet concrete flowed into my creek. I slid on the mud trying to stop them. Fell hard. By the time I got up, the creek was gone, blanketed by a lifeless sheet of gray sludge. The frogs didn't stand a chance. Karen stood across the street, watching with smug satisfaction. I smiled back at her. Let her win this round. She had no idea what she'd started. The early rain was almost a blessing break from the summer. The skies opened, and I sat on my porch and watched as water pounded the concrete gash that had replaced my creek. But the water didn't go away. It backed up. Spread, soaked the grass, pooled in the low spots. Storm upon storm, the problems piled up. Mrs. Jensen's basement was flooded. Alvarez sandbagged his front porch. Maple Drive was a standing pond. The HOA blamed all and sundry but themselves. Faulty grading, clogged drains. Never did they mention the concrete slab constricting the neighborhood's natural drainage. I said nothing, but I shot. Dozens of them, waterlogged yards, submerged curbs, water where there shouldn't have been any. Had a notebook I lugged around with dates, times, addresses. Flashing my drone after storms. Documented everything. And while the HOA issued emergency fines and held pointless meetings, the neighborhood turned on one another. Neighbors accused, reported in complaints. Karen, of course, thrived. Wore her badge like a sheriff's badge. One afternoon, she presented me with a form calling for a full landscaping plan to fix my drainage issues. I asked her if the plan needed to extend to the concrete she had spread across my lawn. She blinked. I signed it, smiling. I submitted it with the rest of the documentation. Because this is what you should know: nature doesn't forget. Water doesn't forgive. And concrete can't defy forever rain and gravity. The cracks were beginning to show, retaining walls crumbling, lawns tilting, driveways warping. Then the big one. 100-year storm, they claimed. Rain came down like the wrath of God. Streets became rivers. Gutters peeled from roofs. Basements overflowed. And the houses, oh, the houses, began to crumble. I sat on my porch, same chair, same thermos. Across the street, Karen splashed through ankle-deep water, screaming into her phone as the flood swept over her rose bushes and crept up her stairs. The HOA freaked out. Emergency meetings, sandbags, blame shifting. But anyone with eyes to open could see the truth. It started in my backyard. And when the rumors began, neighbors speculating aloud, perhaps not so quietly, whether or not the HOA had made things worse. Well, I smiled. Because they had no idea what was coming. It started in whispers, initially at emergency HOA meetings, then in passive-aggressive coded emails that went out to all homeowners. Karen made it official at last. She marched up my porch, clipboard tightly in hand, and delivered me a thick-as-a-phone book notice of violation. Negligent property maintenance, not installing proper drainage systems, contribution to flooding in the neighborhood. Rain still lingered at the hem of her designer coat as her voice trembled with barely contained rage. I sat silently, sipping my coffee, nodding when necessary, letting her unload every ounce of fear, anger, and frustration. I said scarcely a word. I signed nothing. Smiled merely, that slow, deliberate smile that made her squint in suspicion. Because I knew something she didn't. I'd known it for weeks. I'd waited, still as a trapdoor spider, quietly and patiently. They'd thought they'd wiped out the creek with concrete and paper. But creeks are more than water on the surface. They're inscribed on the earth, deeper than any HOA charter. You can't wipe them out. The water hadn't vanished. It had vanished below, gradually infilling the dirt along historic paths, decaying everything that stood above. The rain-splintered foundations were not all from rain. The ground itself was shifting, filled with water that had no outlet, pressing up against the concrete that tried to keep it back. And I had proof. Drone footage of early pooling. Overlays from the air charting the sinister creep of water into low-lying homes. Maps of the floodplain that the HOA never bothered to update after they illegally filled in the creek. Even recordings of off-the-record conversations with contractors and surveyors, confirming that what the HOA had done was not only dumb, it was illegal. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. It had to get worse. It had to hurt. And by the suspense mounting like steam from a sewer drain, we were near. You could feel it in the air, the way neighbors barked at each other on flooded sidewalks, the shrill voices at board meetings, the flooded lawns heavy with mud and resentment. Karen felt it too, panicked, dug in, new rules, new fines, surprise inspections. She formed a neighborhood improvement committee and put me on their hit list. I pinned her notice to my growing binder. Next, I put a copy in the waterproof box I'd hidden beneath the old oak tree. Because people like Karen, once they start losing their grip, they fumble. Great ones. The property was already carrying the heavy load. Retaining walls sagged. Doorways slumped. For sale signs grew like mushrooms after rain. Her empire of regulations was rotting from the center. And she still thought it was all about me. That was her biggest mistake. This was about the land. That night, I found it, the heavy envelope at the back of my file cabinet, behind dusty guidebooks and a roll of spare Christmas lights. My grandfather had left it with me when he had given me ownership of the property. Might come in handy someday, he'd told me, without explaining why. And in it were all these things. Original land surveys completed in 1952. A 1978 letter certifying a permanent easement for drainage. State environmental protection orders declaring the creek to be part of a protected watershed. Concrete evidence, actual evidence made of concrete, that what the HOA had done was illegal. I didn't march into an HOA meeting waving papers. No, I contacted the proper authorities. County water departments, the city environmental department. I made formal complaints, didn't name the HOA, let them figure it out themselves. Meanwhile, I sent anonymous packages to the news outlets, Facebook groups, and even the HOA forum Karen had previously banned me from. 3 days later, the white trucks came. City, county, clipboards, and surveying, gear-wielding inspectors. They spent hours in my backyard, measuring, sampling, frowning. That night, the first news report surfaced. Aerial shots of our neighborhood submerged, and a general reference to unauthorized drainage modifications. They did not yet mention the HOA, but they would. The next day, I opened my mailbox to receive a certified letter to the HOA. Karen must have known. It was on her face when she burst into the emergency board of directors meeting. I watched as she slapped a stack of papers on the table, yelling of sabotage, defamation, and conspiracy. But behind her, the projector came to life. Drone photos, easement maps, and word-for-word quotes from county statutes. All from the whistleblower packet. Silence. Even her hardcore board members shifted uncomfortably. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Characterized the concrete as a temporary erosion control. Deigned she required authorization. But when someone asked politely to be shown proof, her mouth slammed shut. That night, the media pounced. Illegal, reckless, criminal liability. Citizens were quoted. A watchdog group launched a petition. The county issued formal violation notices. City inspectors went door to door, not to impose HOA rules, but to assess foundation integrity. And lawsuits started bubbling. Karen struggled to maintain her crumbling empire, gathering her diminishing ranks of adherents, concocting cover-up stories. But too late. Her reign was over. The board sessions became empty. The neighborhood turned its back. I sat on my porch, drinking coffee, reading headlines and court postings. Karen once had the HOA in her grip. Now the city, the law, and the truth had her in their grip by the ankles, pulling her down, slow inch by inch. Then the red tags. Legal-sized envelopes stuffed with citations. Red warning signs nailed onto doors, unsafe structure. Occupancy restricted. Even Karen's home was condemned. Foreclosure notices were the consequence. Insurance companies denied every claim as a case of negligence or code infraction. People were trapped in worthless homes, inching inch by inch into the destruction she wrought. Karen? She ended up with an RV borrowed, parked on the outskirts of the complex, wheels stuck in the same mud she first tried to deny. The HOA ended at an emergency meeting. No orating, no brawl. Just weary hands raised in the rain. Karen complained. Nobody paid attention. She was last seen hauling boxes of torn-up files out of the community center with a city marshal in charge. But the story did not end like that. We had a choice. Rebuild business as usual, or listen to the land. We listened to the land. With the county's help, we ripped up the concrete, seeded the banks again, and let the creek run free again, lined with willows, native grasses, and considerate stones. When water first bubbled through my backyard again, laughing and clear, I could feel the earth sigh. And then I created a little wooden sign, planted at the bend of the creek. Nature always wins. Not because it was mean-spirited, not because it was arrogant, but because it was true. For all the laws, the fines, the cement, and the hubris, they lost sight of the oldest law of them all. You can't take the land. It waits. It remembers. And when the time comes right, it takes back what's its own.